Behind Cecil B. DeMille's biblical epic lurked some of Hollywood's most bizarre secrets. From spray-painted popcorn standing in for divine hail to a future rock legend getting his start as an uncredited drummer boy, the Ten Commandments harbored production stories wilder than any plague. One director's heart attack, accidentally authentic costume colors, and a famous anecdote about an extra's bathroom break created legends that outlasted the film itself. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about the Ten Commandments, 1956. Fact 1. Popcorn Plague. When audiences watched the terrifying hail plague rain down on Pharaoh's palace in the Ten Commandments, they were actually witnessing one of Hollywood's most creative, budget-saving tricks. Those menacing hailstones that seemed to fall from an angry sky were nothing more than ordinary popcorn that had been spray-painted white by the special effects team. Cecil B. DeMille and his crew faced a unique challenge when creating the seventh plague of Egypt for the 1956 biblical epic. They needed something that would look convincing as hail on camera, but wouldn't actually injure the actors who had to stand in the middle of the artificial storm. Traditional materials like ice cubes or small rocks were immediately ruled out because they could cause serious harm when dropped from heights onto performers below. The art department experimented with several lightweight alternatives before settling on popcorn as their solution. The fluffy snack proved perfect for their needs because it was incredibly light, making it safe for actors to be pelted with during filming. When spray-painted white, the popcorn kernels looked remarkably similar to actual hailstones bouncing and scattering across the palace floor. But the practical benefits went beyond just safety considerations. The popcorn hail was also economical and reusable, which mattered greatly during the film's massive production budget. After each take, crew members could simply sweep up the scattered kernels and use them again for additional shots of the same scene. This meant the special effects department could achieve multiple camera angles and retakes without constantly having to create new batches of fake hail. The animated fire effects that appeared to burn from the falling hail were added later through optical effects, creating the complete illusion of the supernatural plague. While the background hail falling from the sky was created through animation, the foreground hail that actually interacted with the actors and bounced realistically off the palace surfaces was all thanks to this clever popcorn solution that kept both the budget and the cast members safe during filming. Fact 2. Heart attack on a 130-foot ladder. At 73 years old, Cecil B. DeMille proved that age was just a number when he personally climbed a 130-foot ladder to check on a malfunctioning camera during the filming of the Ten Commandments. What should have been a routine equipment inspection turned into a life-threatening medical emergency that nearly ended production of the biblical epic. DeMille was known throughout Hollywood for his hands-on directing style and refusal to delegate important tasks to others, even when it meant putting himself in dangerous situations. The massive gates used for the Exodus sequence were among the largest film sets ever constructed, towering over 100 feet into the air. And when technical problems arose with one of the cameras positioned at the top, DeMille insisted on climbing up to examine the issue himself rather than sending a crew member. The physical strain of the climb proved too much for the aging director, and he suffered a serious heart attack while perched high above the set. His doctor immediately advised him to stop filming entirely, warning that continuing to work could literally kill him. When DeMille heard this ultimatum, he reportedly responded with characteristic determination, saying, "Then I will die," showing his absolute commitment to completing what he knew would be his final masterpiece. Rather than follow medical advice and take proper time to recover, DeMille took only 2 days off before returning to the set to continue directing. To avoid alarming the cast, crew, and studio executives about his serious condition, he cleverly disguised his heart attack as a case of dysentery, telling everyone he had simply been suffering from stomach problems. His staff and colleagues rallied around him during this critical period, following his meticulously prepared production plans and taking on additional responsibilities to reduce the physical pressure on their determined director. DeMille's foresight and detailed preparation ultimately saved the production, allowing him to complete the film despite his health crisis. Fact 3. Metallica's biblical inspiration. One of heavy metal's most iconic songs traces its origins back to a quiet evening in 1983 when 3 members of Metallica gathered at bassist Cliff Burton's parents' house to watch Cecil B. DeMille's biblical epic on VHS. The band members James Hetfield, Lars Ulrich, and Burton had rented the Ten Commandments because they didn't own a video player themselves, and what started as casual movie night entertainment ended up inspiring one of their biggest hits. During the film's climactic plague sequence, where Moses brings divine punishment upon Egypt for refusing to free the Hebrew slaves, the movie depicts the angel of death as an eerie green fog that creeps across the landscape to claim the firstborn sons of Egyptian families. When Burton saw this supernatural mist slowly moving through the scenes, he immediately turned to his bandmates and said the phrase that would become legendary in metal history: "Whoa, it's like creeping death." That simple observation sparked the creative process for what would become the song "Creeping Death" on Metallica's 1984 album Ride the Lightning. The band was already working on new material for their follow-up To Kill 'Em All, and Burton's phrase perfectly captured the ominous, supernatural theme they wanted to explore in their music. Hetfield took Burton's inspiration and developed it into a complete song told from the perspective of the angel of death itself, describing the 10th plague of Egypt and the biblical story of Passover. The lyrics reference multiple plagues from the movie, including the turning of the Nile to blood and the burning hail that falls from the sky. The song became one of Metallica's most popular live performances, particularly famous for its middle section, where audiences chant along with the repeated word "die" during concert. What makes this connection even more remarkable is that a Danish household's love for watching the Ten Commandments on television, whenever it was broadcast, ultimately influenced one of the most celebrated thrash metal anthems ever recorded. Fact 4. The Bald-Headed Old Fart Incident. Cecil B. DeMille was known throughout Hollywood for his commanding presence on set and his ability to control massive productions with hundreds of extras. But one particular moment during the filming of the Ten Commandments became legendary for showing his unexpected sense of humor. The incident occurred during the elaborate orgy scene that takes place while Moses is away receiving the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai, a sequence that required several weeks of filming with countless background performers. DeMille was perched high on a ladder with his trademark megaphone, delivering his customarily long and detailed directions to the hundreds of extras involved in the complex scene. As the 75-year-old director droned on for several minutes about their blocking and motivations, he noticed two young women in the crowd who were having their own private conversation, instead of paying attention to his instructions. The famously authoritarian director stopped his speech mid-sentence and called out the chatting extras in front of the entire cast and crew. Through his megaphone, DeMille announced that they apparently had a young woman whose conversation with her friend was more important than listening to instructions from her director, while they were all engaged in making motion picture history. He then challenged the woman to share whatever was so important that it couldn't wait until after they completed the shot. After an embarrassed pause that seemed to stretch on forever, the bold extra spoke up and confessed exactly what she had been saying to her friend. In front of hundreds of people, she admitted that she was just asking when that bald-headed old fart is going to call lunch. The entire set fell silent as everyone waited to see how the notoriously strict director would react to such an audacious comment. Instead of exploding with anger as many expected, DeMille stared at the woman for a moment, paused thoughtfully, then lifted his megaphone and simply shouted, "Lunch!" The crew and extras burst into laughter, and the incident became one of the most beloved behind-the-scenes stories from the entire production. Fact 5. Audrey Hepburn's Rejected Curves. Audrey Hepburn, who was rapidly becoming one of Hollywood's biggest stars in the mid-1950s, was originally slated to play the seductive Egyptian queen Nefertiti in the Ten Commandments. However, Cecil B. DeMille made the difficult decision to pass on the elegant actress for reasons that had nothing to do with her acting ability and everything to do with her physical appearance. DeMille kept detailed screen test notes that remained private for decades, and his candid assessment of Hepburn revealed his conflicted feelings about her potential casting. In his secret diary, he wrote that she was not pretty but a very cute personality, showing that he recognized her charm and screen presence. However, the director ultimately concluded that Hepburn was too slender for the role, using 1950s Hollywood code language that really meant he considered her flat-chested. The issue wasn't personal preference, but rather practical concerns about the elaborate costumes designed for the Egyptian queen character. The wardrobe department had created incredibly ornate and revealing outfits that were meant to showcase the voluptuous figure of an ancient Egyptian royal woman. These costumes featured intricate beadwork, sheer fabrics, and designs that required a more curvaceous actress to fill them out properly and create the desired visual impact on screen. DeMille reluctant, naturally slender figure wouldn't work with the specific vision he had for Nefertiti, who needed to embody the sensual and powerful Egyptian queen who competes for Moses' affections. The role ultimately went to Anne Baxter, who had originally been considered for the different part of Sephora, Moses' wife in the wilderness. Interestingly, Hepburn's screen test notes also reveal that DeMille had concerns about other actors as well. His assessment of Charlton Heston was equally tough, describing him as having a sinister quality and noting that you believe him, but he's not attractive, while questioning whether Heston had any sense of humor since everything he'd seen him in showed him as dour. Fact 6. Charlton Heston voiced God. In one of the most memorable scenes from the Ten Commandments, Moses encounters the burning bush on Mount Sinai, and hears the voice of God calling him to lead his people out of Egypt. What audiences didn't know for decades was that the divine voice speaking from the flames belonged to none other than Charlton Heston himself, who had personally requested the honor of voicing the Almighty. Heston approached Cecil B. DeMille with an unusual request during production, asking if he could provide the voice of God for the pivotal burning bush sequence. The actor felt a deep connection to the role of Moses and wanted to be involved in this crucial moment where his character receives his divine mission. DeMille was intrigued by the idea and agreed to let Heston record the voice of God, creating a unique situation where the same actor played both sides of this biblical conversation. The decision was based on more than just Heston's personal request, as DeMille found inspiration in ancient Jewish tradition for this choice. The director had researched an old legend from the Midrash Rabbah, which suggested that God spoke to Moses using the voice of Amram, Moses' father, so that Moses wouldn't be frightened by hearing an unfamiliar divine voice. This gave DeMille the perfect justification for using Heston's own voice in the scene. To create the proper otherworldly effect, the sound engineers took Heston's recorded dialogue and electronically altered it by slowing it down and deepening the tone, making it sound more mysterious and powerful than his normal speaking voice. The result was a voice that was recognizably human yet clearly supernatural, perfectly fitting the scene's requirements. For many years after the film's release, there was controversy and speculation about who had actually provided God's voice, with no official credit given in the movie. It wasn't until the 2004 DVD release that Heston finally admitted publicly that he had been the voice of God all along, ending decades of mystery about one of cinema's most famous divine encounters. Fact 7. A future trumpet legend's cameo. Years before he became a household name with hits like The Lonely Bull and A Taste of Honey, a young musician named Herb Alpert appeared as an uncredited extra in the Ten Commandments, playing a drummer during one of the film's most dramatic sequences. At the time, Alpert was just 21 years old and attending the University of Southern California, where he was a member of the Trojan Marching Band, completely unaware that he would later become one of the most successful instrumental recording artists of the 1960s. Alpert's role in the biblical epic was small but memorable for those who knew where to look. He appeared as drummer on Mount Sinai during the Golden Calf scene, which takes place when Moses is away receiving the Ten Commandments and the Israelites fall into revelry and idol worship. The scene required musicians to provide the wild, chaotic atmosphere of the forbidden celebration, and Alpert was hired to play kettle drums as part of the orgiastic festivities. What makes his appearance particularly interesting is that the scene was designed to open with a close-up shot of his muscular back as he played the drums, with the camera slowly pulling back to reveal the full scope of the debauchery taking place around the golden idol. Just before filming began, the young musician showed remarkable confidence by calling up to director Cecil B. DeMille, who was positioned on a camera boom high above the set, and asking if the scene could open on his face instead of his back. DeMille's response was swift and dismissive, effectively keeping Alpert's face hidden from movie history. As a result, viewers can only see the future trumpet star from behind, his identity completely obscured by the camera angle that DeMille insisted on maintaining. This early Hollywood experience came during Alpert's college years, before he served in the U.S. Army during the Korean War and eventually co-founded AM Records. By the mid-1960s, Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass had become one of the most popular instrumental groups in America, making his anonymous drumming appearance in DeMille's epic a fascinating footnote in music history. Fact 8. Accidentally authentic Moses costume. When the costume designer for the Ten Commandments was creating Moses's distinctive robe, he made what seemed like a purely aesthetic choice that turned out to be historically accurate in ways he never could have imagined. The designer selected a striking combination of rust, white, and black stripes for Charlton Heston's most recognizable costume simply because he thought these colors looked visually impressive and would photograph well in Technicolor. The costume department was working under enormous pressure to create hundreds of elaborate outfits for the epic production, and they were primarily focused on creating costumes that would look spectacular on the big screen, rather than achieving perfect historical accuracy. For Moses's robe, the designer wanted something that would make the character stand out as a leader and prophet, so he chose this bold striped pattern, based purely on its visual impact and dramatic appearance. The design team had no idea that they had accidentally recreated the exact color scheme that ancient Hebrew texts describe for traditional Levite priestly garments. According to historical and religious sources that the costume department only discovered after filming was completed, these specific colors of rust, white, and black were indeed the traditional colors worn by the Levite priests in ancient Israel, the very religious tribe that Moses belonged to, according to biblical accounts. This remarkable coincidence meant that one of the most iconic costumes in cinema history was not only visually striking, but also completely authentic to the historical period and religious traditions being depicted in the film. The accidental accuracy became even more meaningful when considering that Moses was himself a Levite, making the costume choice perfectly appropriate for his character's background and religious role. The discovery of this historical accuracy came as a pleasant surprise to the production team and added an unexpected layer of authenticity to a film that was already being praised for its attention to detail in other areas. What had started as a simple design decision based on visual appeal turned out to be one of the most historically accurate costume choices in the entire production, proving that sometimes the best research happens completely by accident. Fact 9. The missing frog plague. Cecil B. DeMille actually filmed a complete sequence depicting the second plague of Egypt, where frogs emerge from the muddy Nile River and invade the Egyptian palace. But audiences never got to see this biblical spectacle because the director made a last-minute decision to cut it entirely from the final film. The sequence showed frogs leaving the contaminated waters and hopping up onto dry land, then chasing terrified Egyptian women, including Queen Nefertiti, through the elaborate chambers and corridors of Pharaoh's palace. DeMille had invested considerable time and resources into creating this plague scene, complete with live frogs, elaborate set pieces, and detailed choreography for the actors who had to react to the amphibian invasion. The sequence was designed to show the supernatural power of Moses's God as the plagues progressively devastated Egypt, building tension toward the final and most devastating plague that would claim the sons. However, when DeMille reviewed the completed footage during post-production, he realized that the scene was creating exactly the wrong emotional response from test audiences. Instead of feeling fear or awe at the divine punishment being visited upon Egypt, viewers were laughing at the sight of Egyptian women running and screaming as small frogs hopped after them through the palace. The director felt that the visual of people being chased by frogs was inherently comedic rather than frightening, no matter how seriously the actors played their roles. DeMille was particularly concerned that the frog sequence would undermine the serious religious tone he was trying to maintain throughout the film. He worried that audiences would start giggling during this scene and then not take the subsequent plagues seriously, which would damage the overall impact of Moses's confrontation with Pharaoh. The decision to remove the frog plague was made just before the film's completion in 1956, and the footage was never included in any subsequent releases or special editions. According to commentary on the 50th anniversary DVD release, this deleted scene remained one of the most significant cuts made during the film's editing process. Fact 10. Yul Brynner's weightlifting competition. When Yul Brynner learned that he would be playing Pharaoh Ramesses II opposite Charlton Heston's Moses in the Ten Commandments, he immediately faced a challenging reality about his physical appearance. Brynner discovered that his role would require him to be shirtless for most of the movie, standing next to Heston, who was already known throughout Hollywood for his impressive muscular physique and commanding 6-foot 3-inch frame. Brynner, who stood 5 feet 8 inches tall, realized that he could easily be physically overshadowed by his co-star during their many scenes together, which would undermine his character's authority as the powerful Egyptian ruler. Rather than accept this disadvantage, the determined actor decided to take dramatic action to level the playing field and began an intensive weightlifting and bodybuilding program specifically designed to bulk up his frame for the role. The rigorous training regimen that Brynner undertook was so effective that it completely transformed his physical appearance, giving him a much more muscular and imposing presence than he had ever displayed in previous films. This newly buff physique became particularly noticeable when Brynner filmed The King and I immediately after completing the Ten Commandments, where audiences could see his dramatically enhanced muscle definition even while wearing the elaborate costumes of the King of Siam. The timing of these two major film roles created an interesting visual progression for moviegoers who could witness the results of Brynner's dedicated physical transformation between his work on the biblical epic and the musical adaptation. His commitment to building muscle mass for the Ten Commandments had lasting effects on his screen presence and helped establish the physically powerful image that would define many of his subsequent roles. Years later, Charlton Heston acknowledged Brynner's dedication and the results of his efforts, stating that despite all the impressive performances in the Ten Commandments, Brynner had delivered the best acting performance in the entire film. This praise suggested that Brynner's physical preparation had been matched by equally intense work on his dramatic portrayal of the stubborn Egyptian pharaoh. Fact 11. Baby Moses was really Moses. In one of the most touching examples of family involvement in the Ten Commandments, the infant Moses who appears floating in the famous basket scene was played by Charlton Heston's own newborn son, Fraser Clark Heston. The baby was born on February 12, 1955, and was only 3 months old when he was filmed for the biblical epic, making his movie debut at an age when most children can barely hold up their own heads. The decision to cast Fraser in this crucial early scene created a unique connection between the actor and his character that went far beyond typical Hollywood casting. When audiences watched the baby Moses being discovered by Pharaoh's daughter in the bulrushes along the Nile River, they were actually witnessing a real father-son relationship playing out on screen, even though Charlton Heston wouldn't appear as the adult Moses until much later in the film. Cecil B. DeMille was known for his attention to detail and his preference for authenticity in his productions, and having a real newborn baby in the basket scene added a genuine quality that would have been difficult to achieve with older child actors or dolls. Fraser's natural infant movements and expressions brought life to this pivotal moment in the biblical story when Moses' mother Jochebed places him in the waterproof basket to save him from Pharaoh's decree to kill all Hebrew male children. The casting choice also created a special memento for the Heston family, as Fraser could later claim the distinction of having appeared in one of cinema's greatest epics before he could even walk or talk. This early exposure to filmmaking may have influenced his later career choices, as Fraser Clark Heston eventually became a director and screenwriter himself, working on projects including the 1990 adaptation of Treasure Island. The baby Moses scene remains one of the most memorable and emotionally powerful moments in the Ten Commandments, and knowing that it featured the real son of the man who would grow up to become the most famous cinematic Moses adds an extra layer of meaning to this already significant sequence. Fact 12. Orgy scene exhaustion. Quote, the elaborate golden calf orgy sequence in the Ten Commandments, which depicts the Israelites falling into debauchery while Moses is away receiving the Ten Commandments, required an exhausting 3 weeks of continuous filming with hundreds of extras. This massive production challenge became one of the most grueling experiences for everyone involved, from the main actors down to the background performers who had to maintain energy and enthusiasm for the wild celebration scene day after day. According to Charlton Heston's autobiography, the extended filming schedule for this sequence pushed everyone to their physical and emotional limits. The scene required countless takes from multiple camera angles to capture the full scope of the revelry, with extras dancing, drinking, and celebrating around the golden idol, while maintaining the appearance of genuine excitement and abandon throughout each long shooting day. The complexity of coordinating hundreds of performers in elaborate costumes, combined with the technical demands of lighting and filming such a large-scale sequence, meant that each day stretched on for hours longer than typical movie scenes. Extras had to repeatedly perform the same energetic actions while dealing with hot studio lights, heavy makeup, and the pressure of maintaining their performances across multiple takes and camera setups. The physical and mental exhaustion eventually took its toll on the cast, leading to one of Hollywood's most memorable behind-the-scenes quotes. Heston recalled overhearing a female extra express her frustration with the endless filming schedule by sarcastically asking to no one in particular, "Who do I have to sleep with to get out of this movie?" The comment was a clever twist on the infamous Hollywood casting couch joke, where aspiring actors supposedly asked who they had to sleep with to get into movies. This quote perfectly captured the sentiment of performers who had signed up expecting a few days of work, but found themselves trapped in what felt like an endless cycle of filming the same elaborate scene. The comment became legendary among the cast and crew as a humorous expression of their shared exhaustion during one of the most demanding sequences in the entire production. Fact 13. 4,000 publicity monuments became law. As part of his ambitious plan to promote the Ten Commandments and spread biblical values across America, Cecil B. DeMille convinced Paramount Pictures to fund one of the most unusual publicity campaigns in Hollywood history. The studio agreed to pay for the creation of over 4,000 granite monuments inscribed with the Ten Commandments, which were then donated to local civic organizations and placed in public squares, courthouse grounds, and government buildings throughout the United States. DeMille believed that these stone monuments, known as decalogues, would serve a dual purpose by promoting his film while also reminding Americans of the moral foundation he felt was essential to their freedom and democracy. The director was deeply committed to the idea that the Ten Commandments represented the bedrock of human liberty, and he saw the monument campaign as a way to reinforce these values in communities across the nation during the height of the Cold War. The granite monuments were carefully designed to look impressive and permanent, featuring the biblical text carved into durable stone that would withstand weather and time. Most of the monuments were strategically placed in prominent locations near government buildings, where they would be visible to citizens conducting official business and serve as constant reminders of the moral principles that DeMille believed should guide American society. What started as a 1950s movie publicity stunt eventually became the center of a major constitutional law case that reached the highest court in the land. In 2005, the United States Supreme Court heard arguments about whether religious displays could remain on public property without violating the separation of church and state established by the First Amendment. The specific monument that became the focus of this landmark case was located in Austin, Texas, and had been standing on the grounds of the state capitol for decades. The Supreme Court ultimately ruled that the Ten Commandments could remain on public property if they served a secular purpose rather than purely religious promotion. This decision established important precedent for religious displays on government property, meaning that DeMille's original publicity campaign for his biblical epic became the foundation for constitutional law in America. Fact 14. Disney animators created biblical miracles. To achieve the supernatural visual effects needed for some of the Ten Commandments' most memorable biblical sequences, Paramount Pictures made the unusual decision to borrow animation talent from their competitor, Walt Disney Studios. The studio specifically recruited several Disney animators, including Joshua Meador, to work on creating the Pillar of Fire and the Divine Finger of God sequences that appear during Moses' encounters with the Almighty on Mount Sinai. The collaboration between these two major studios was remarkable, considering that Paramount and Disney were typically rivals in the entertainment industry. However, DeMille recognized that Disney's animators possessed unique skills in creating magical, otherworldly effects that would be essential for depicting the supernatural elements of the biblical story in a convincing and visually spectacular way. The Disney artists brought their expertise in character animation and special effects to create some of the most technically complex sequences in the entire film. For the Pillar of Fire scene, they used an incredibly detailed process that involved 9 different shades of color to create the realistic appearance of divine flames guiding the Israelites through the wilderness. The animators carefully layered these colors to achieve depth and movement that would look believable when combined with the live-action footage. The Finger of God sequence, which shows the divine hand writing the 10 Commandments directly onto stone tablets, required even more painstaking work from the animation team. They created 3 separate drawings for each individual frame of the commandments being etched into the stone, ensuring that every letter appeared to be carved by an invisible supernatural force with perfect precision and timing. To enhance the magical quality of these scenes, the animators added swirling sparks that appeared and disappeared around the divine fire by superimposing slow-motion footage of burning magnesium over their animated flames. This combination of traditional animation techniques with live-action special effects created visual spectacles that were far ahead of their time and established new standards for depicting miraculous events in biblical epics. The success of this cross-studio collaboration demonstrated how the film industry could pool its best talent to achieve artistic goals that no single studio could accomplish alone. Fact 15. Star Trek props recycling. More than 30 years after the 10 Commandments premiered in theaters, many of the elaborate props created for Cecil B. DeMille's biblical epic found an unexpected second life in the far future of science fiction television. The ornate cups, glasses, goblets, and various pieces of tableware that had once graced the tables of ancient Egyptian pharaohs were carefully stored in Hollywood prop warehouses and eventually made their way into the 24th century aboard the starship Enterprise. The reuse of these props occurred during the production of Star Trek: The Next Generation, specifically in the 6th-season episode titled Tapestry, which aired in 1993. This episode featured Captain Jean-Luc Picard experiencing an alternate timeline where he makes different life choices, and the elaborate dining scenes required sophisticated tableware that would look appropriate for formal occasions in the futuristic setting. Rather than create entirely new props for these scenes, the Star Trek production team discovered that the ornate Egyptian-style vessels from the 10 Commandments were perfect for their needs. The elaborate designs and rich decorative details that had originally been created to represent the wealth and sophistication of ancient Egypt translated surprisingly well to the refined aesthetic of 24th century Federation society. This prop recycling was part of a common Hollywood practice, where expensive set pieces and decorative items are stored and reused across multiple productions to save money and time. The 10 Commandments had been such a massive and expensive production that its props were particularly valuable and well-made, making them ideal candidates for future use in other high-budget projects that needed quality decorative elements. The irony of this reuse was not lost on science fiction fans who noticed the connection between the two productions. Objects that had once been handled by Charlton Heston as Moses and Yul Brynner as Pharaoh Ramesses were now appearing in scenes with Patrick Stewart's Captain Picard, creating an amusing link between biblical antiquity and space-age technology that demonstrated how Hollywood's practical needs could create unexpected connections across vastly different genres and time periods.